think we can get rolling. So, like I said, appreciate you hopping on. If you want to just give like a quick intro, who you are, what you're up to, for those who may not know, and then we can dive into the combo.
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, so what's going on, everybody? My name is Sersu. I go by Sersu Habe on Twitter. Um, I'm a classically trained artist, but my main job has been in service design and anthropology. So I guess in any other traditional circle of design, you might see that title somewhere around the lines of user experience designer and or researcher. I've kind of usually towed the line between both of those and also a prototypist. So I usually found myself kind of facilitating creative work and by managing different people and trying to find ways to solve projects or solve problems creatively, whether it's through a transformational approach or an optimizational approach. That's, I guess, in many ways, sort of like speak for consultants and or agency type of work, which was most of what I used to do. Now, after kind of being a part of crypto and sort of seeing how it could empower my artistry, it got me back into being an artist, and I kind of dove headfirst in trying to find systems and ways to bring a lot of my friends on, since I went to art school and a lot of my core community are artists, are creatives of some sort of space or context. And so that led me to building Met Fund with one of our other co-founders, Carlos, who runs For Friends. That's fucking dope. And then I have The Well, which is a property built to be a cultural index that routes value to all contributors within that framework. And there's a bit kind of talking about it within our Twitter wellness culture, but I still haven't revealed a lot of the actual site itself. And then this new, but not new, project called Black Hand, which was sort of invented by me and my high school buddies back in the start of the pandemic. And we just wanted to, stream and get into the gaming industry and find a really good way for us to sort of like bring out our old semi-pro days of playing Halo 2, Counter-Strike, so on and so forth, and winning tournaments back then when there was no money in esports, to finding some way for us to get back into it. And we realized after NFTs that decentralizing it would be the best opportunity for us to not only participate back into esports, but to provide an outlet for other people to participate in it too. So, so those are the things that I've been working on. Kind of like in a brief overview, there's of course a whole lot more things that I've worked on too. Like shout out to Party Bid and Crypto Cookout. Shout out to First Story Down and Digital Diaspora. Shout out to all the different platforms doing amazing things and me being able to kind of help put artists on. So it's been a really dope journey over the past year, and just very excited to see what the rest of this year holds and then what next year looks like.
Sweet. Yeah, I think we can have hours of conversation about everything you worked on. Fortunately, obviously, but we can't cover all of it. And today is going to be focused on Black Hand. So you mentioned that like this is both a new and an old project. You and your friends have been working on this for a while, but like based off of my previous conversations with you as well, like the idea that Black Hand has currently spawned as was not the same idea that you necessarily started with. So walk us through like what that evolution looked like.
Yeah, so me and my three other buddies, ATM, Blackout, and Movable, we were all friends, and we all at certain points, I had individual and group conversations with them about, playing games and getting back into the competitive circuit. And so we would always play like Apex or League of Legends or a few of the games together that we were pretty good at. And we were like, yeah, like let's do something. And then 2020 hits, and we're like, pandemic. Ooh, this is different. We have, some of them didn't have jobs. We didn't all have like jobs at different points in times, or our workload was significantly reduced. Like my workload was super reduced, and I was just like, well, let's find some time to stream now that we have it. And that just became sort of our thing. We're like, yeah, we're gonna change the industry. We're gonna get big through Twitter and blah 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 and all that kind of cool stuff. So we built a Twitter. We built Twitter accounts. We got a Twitch affiliate with not Twitter accounts. We built Twitch accounts. Got Twitch affiliate in about a month after sort of putting things out there. And started to build like this small niche community and got really connected with a lot of the folks making bigger waves, especially within the Black community, to push Twitch and other streaming platforms to be a lot more inclusive. So you look at the group like Noir, or if you look at the work like Ex Mira is doing, or Ebonics is doing, especially when it came to like building much more advocacy in The Sims. That became one of our sort of means to sort of like amplify through social media, not only to show solidarity within the space, but because it was something that was highly resonant to us. And as we were kind of like going through this entire process, something in the back of my head, I just kept like wondering, like, how the fuck do I like we're not big to do anything big other than like giving a subscription to someone, which is a great feeling. And I'm like, thankfully, I have enough disposable income to help other people do that. But at the same time, I needed something a lot more substantial and sustainable. Like, I needed to build a framework that allowed us to route value or to distribute value to all of the different people that are building so many dope things in the space. Like, they're paving roads for us, and all I can offer them is like a couple of subscriptions a month. Like, it just didn't seem comparable to the work that they were doing. And we stumbled upon NFTs. Like my friend Late Effects like put me on the NFTs like last August. And I think that's when sort of everything sort of like connected, where NFTs are a delivery vehicle for storytelling, and depending on what it is, whether it's a movie, a static asset, GIF, a profile photo, it doesn't fucking matter what the NFT is, but it has the ability to hold and to create value for its holders, especially if a community gives it value and builds a story around it. And so that became a thing I was dogmatic and wanting to learn more about, because the more I got to understand how NFTs could work or how you could recontextualize them for different communities, the more I realized that this was a catalyst that we could use to change esports, and we can use it to change the gaming communities and use it to change the streaming content creative communities, and impact all of the different people, all the different micro groups that basically shaped our vision for how we wanted Black Hand to operate within those spaces, within those gaming spaces. Now we have an actual framework that's suitable for giving back to those people that gave us so much and empowered us, but also build an economic model that would reward everyone just for being a part of something amazing. So the pivot took about 8 months to make, because the more we had to understand really like how NFTs work, and I'm grateful we were able to collaborate with so many other people in the process to get to where we are now. And so it's no mistake that when we were able to present that package through Mira, that crowdfund that we had launched a seed round within 24 hours, it was nothing short of incredible. And it was something that was still unexpected to me. Like, I didn't think we'd hit that much, but the fact that we did was like, holy shit! Like, people believe in this. So that means we're on the right track. So it's now about execution.
Definitely. And I think what's like super interesting about that story is, so generally there are two different angles that people will come from in like decentralizing their organization. The first is obviously like this idea of like progressive decentralization. The organization starts, you're doing your thing, and then you progressively like hand it out to the community. On the other end of things, though, some people would just like from day one, just like top down design like this decentralized structure and then just launch it and have the community run with it. And obviously there are different gradients of that in the middle as well. But like, it seems like from you guys' ends, you started off just doing this for fun. You were like, yo, we want to be able to like have like wider community impact. But what did that initial like token design and organizational design look like internally? And how did you decide on what eventually became like that Black Hand crowdfund?
Man, okay, so community design was easier. Token design was harder. Um, I've looked at so many different tokens and how they started and the economics around it. Like some people had, and and it's an interesting conversation. Like if I'm a gaming, if we're a gaming organization, some people may ask like it would make more sense to have a lot more tokens that you're distributed, to give some more accessibility to a bunch of people, kind of like at one point in time. Because for us, we only have about 1.35 million tokens, so we don't have a lot of tokens. But I think what's great about having a small token allotment for us meant that things were a little bit tighter. And from a planning perspective, it really created um, for us a challenge on figuring out like how do you distribute um, sort of a smaller amount of tokens? How do you get that sort of like value, and then what does that mean as you scale and grow and become a much larger entity? And I think what's really interesting is like being able to have a much tighter token mechanic means that you have to be a little bit more discerning about your decision making and your choices. And I'm also a person that's not necessarily the most math inclined, so I didn't want to have to deal with a whole host of millions and millions and millions of tokens to figure out how things get broken down. But if I had like a million or less, I can work with those numbers a lot easier. So it was kind of like a mixture of a couple of different things, but I think the other big thing that I had to consider too was figuring out how to deploy the crowd fund. And through Mirror, when you launch a crowd fund, it's sort of like it's an uncapped token supply until the crowd fund ends. So meaning the way that it works is that one ETH equals 1,000 tokens, and then any other percentage of ETH above or lower than that gives you a certain token like readout, or token value, I suppose, token amount. And then depending on how much tokens you withhold within a particular campaign determines how much more tokens are actually minted. So, for instance, if you create a mirror crowdfund and you say, I need 100 ETH, then and you say that I don't want to withhold any tokens, right? Then whatever tokens are generated, the 100,000 tokens that are generated, that's all the supply that's there, right? But in our case, we were like, we want to raise 100 ETH, and we're gonna have that's our soft cap. We have a hard cap of maybe like 500 ETH, and we're gonna withhold 75%. And we did this because it gave us enough runway to build a tokenomic model that no matter what we we have, at least it gives us an ability to find a way to build more means of distribution of tokens later, instead of a campaign in which all these tokens are out and there's nothing withheld, meaning there's no one. We'd have to sort of like ask people to create a like a market with liquidity in it. But because we withheld tokens and we withheld a good amount of them, we withheld about 75%. It allowed us to then build a means of distribution, and allows us to build an LP pool, and then kind of gradually build up in which other people are selling their tokens or providing more LP. Creating much more of a liquid market for the token. I'm very curious. We're very curious to see kind of how all this stuff sort of shakes out in the next couple of months. But so far, we've been having some really cool, slow and steady growth. We launched our LP program. So things are moving pretty smoothly in that end. But I think from the community perspective, we were much more focused on figuring out how we could create something really dynamic and interesting for community members. And this is something that we haven't pushed out yet, but we've been working on creating a season pass or a battle pass, which basically kind of creates like this very fun and engaging and challenging mode for community members to participate in, which allows free members to earn a full membership and allows continuing members who harness or have purchased different NFTs to have other interesting conversations and abilities within this battle pass to unlock some really cool storytelling elements because we have this meta campaign thing that we're building. But yeah, I think long story short, tokens were sort of interesting, but we took a look at a lot of great DAOs like Friends with Benefits. We took a look at Forefront. We took a look at a few different other organizations to really figure out how tokenomics could make sense, and kind of made an amalgamation of all of those different things. And we use Mirror because it really helped us deploy our. I think they're probably like one of the best primitives to set up a DAO, and I wanted to create ease of use for people who were already a part of our community that have no idea what the hell crypto is, to find a smooth process to onboard them into our newer environment as being a crypto native gaming community.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, I think you probably learned through this process a lesson that everybody in the space is learning, and it's that like everybody's sort of just playing it by ear, right? There's no playbook, there's no one way to do it, and like the fact that it turned out so well is just like a testament to the research and work that you put in. So big props there, and then definitely excited to see how that model plays out in the long term. I'm curious from your perspective, like I think I think the tokenization model was and is exciting just like generally throughout the space. Like that model as a means of like introducing ownership to a community is something that a lot of people are excited about. But at the same time, there's this conversation around like financialization of community and financialization of culture and like what does that end up looking like and what long-term impacts does that have, both positive and negative. This could possibly lead to like a much wider conversation around a lot of the projects that you're working in. But I'm curious specifically for Black Hand, like, were there any hesitations to like launching a token model so early on, and how do you plan on dealing with like those pros and cons?
Word. So I do want to say that like many communities are financialized. It's just that many of us never experience the actual upside of that financialization. If you think about social media that we all use, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, those are all financialized communities, but we don't receive any upside of it unless you're a top 1% or 10% creative. And even then, the value that you are getting is very, very low in relation to what value you may have to deliver into that space. And then other people try to find ways to gamify it by putting the folks down. And so it creates sort of like this really odd crabs in a barrel type of scenario. So people mention financialization of community and things of that nature as if other communities were never financialized. Many communities are powered by financial elements in some shape, form, or fashion. It just really depends on if you're getting the benefit out of it as well, or if you're being exploited, and many times most people are being exploited. But as far as like Black Hand is concerned and us putting out a token early, we realize esports is expensive as hell, and in many ways, for us to be a successful property, we needed to have sort of opened up some of the doors or some of the gates for financial opportunity for our community members pretty early. This allows us to have multiple conversations. It's not as if I couldn't do this without creating sort of like that financial opportunity, but we've asked our community to do two big things. One, to help fund um, stockpiling our in-game treasury, and then two, also being able to help us support and stand up esports teams that will have paid players competing and on our with our banner in the hopes of winning really big tournaments both in the crypto native space and within the non crypto space. And for the crypto native communities, there's only a select few games that do have esports already set up. And for many of the other ones, many of these games have not fully released yet. And so there's sort of like a waiting property. And in a sense, we can build value off of asset acquisition, but ultimately, there's a lot more work to be done foundationally within the crypto native space to help build and stand up like these esports leagues or these competitive areas. We need to have better player advocacy in general, a way in which we can find players and support them financially, and so that requires a lot more upfront cost that than many people are looking at. And so, in order for us to be sort of successful, activating our token pretty early, and then allowing us to then partner with particular angel investors, VC groups, other crypto native communities, esports teams, and esports founders, and of course, big partners and sponsors to get in some of our strategic partner pool of our treasury gives us a lot of the upfront capital to kind of make a lot of these moves happen. Of course, we do have NFT sales and things of that nature, which are also great. And of course, any hand member gets access to our full in-game treasury. But again, turning on the financial component puts us in the space of being competitive early. And when we're making a wave about being sort of like one of the first or decentralized esports teams within this space, we have to hit the ground running pretty efficiently and pretty fast to capture not necessarily just market share, but to ensure that we're in the right conversations of building infrastructure to support any type of crypto native esports competition. So activating the token early kind of allows us to do that in a I guess, not necessarily an efficient way, but it helps kind of showcase other inherent value so that we can then use that to slingshot into more comparable races for what we need. Our goal is to be the most pervasive esports team or decentralized esports team, period. And so we've got to be in many ways to be as large, if not larger, and more decentralized than like your TSN or your G2 esports. And we're very excited to see how we build into that over time. But kind of activating our token early allows us to do that.
Yeah, super interesting. I guess to that point, how has the way that you're thinking about token holder engagement and governance evolved since launching the token and launching the project more broadly?
Can you repeat that really quick?
Yeah, sorry. The question was how's the way that you're thinking about like token holder engagement and governance changed since like launching the project, or has it at all?
I feel like it changes daily. Like
that's what I figured. So
like you make a decision, and then you assess it, and you're like, damn, maybe I could have done this differently. Mm-hmm. But it's I'm grateful though, because my goal is to document everything that I'm doing. I haven't found an outlet in which I'm going to like sort of like release some of this information, but I think as I'm exploring how to build this DAO and to build this community, this company, I want to do it in a way that helps other people understand how to stand something up like this for themselves. I mean, there's a lot of guides and things on how to build DAOs, but some of the more common questions are are not necessarily unanswered, but they seem really glossed over. Like I think what people, and I talk to Rahan from Friends with Benefits a lot, about, let's say, like building community and creating incentives and things, and most people don't realize how hard that is. Like you think you have the right type of incentives to get people to do things, and then once you deploy something and then nobody does it, you're like, wait a minute, I thought this would have made sense. But am I thinking about things about what I would have done? Or am I truly thinking about things that the community would do? And then you also end up asking yourself the question, well, who is my community really? Like, who are these people? Because some of you have faces, some of you don't. Some of you have talked to me before, and I've heard your voice, and most of you I haven't. I can only interpret what you're saying via text or maybe like emojis or whatever. And so there's a certain level of distance that I have from certain community members, that makes the challenge of building incentives around all of us a much harder challenge, to do. But through experimentation, you get a chance to really learn. And so it's really about kind of like always being in a mind of doing a scientific method. Like I have a theory or I have an hypothesis that like this thing or this like tool would work within this community in these pointed ways. You have to be very specific about what you're actually trying to do for your community. And if you can distill it in like a few different like in some small points, then you know for a fact you at least have something identifiable that you can look out for to see if it actually works or not. And then in doing so, if it works, and you're like, cool, how can I improve upon this? If it doesn't work, okay, how can I improve upon this? Meaning, do I need to tweak it? Do I need to throw this out entirely? Do I need to deploy another test because there weren't enough people around the first time to see if it worked? Maybe because we have more people with more aligned incentives, maybe things could work out. And then never to be afraid of putting an old idea back into work if you had an initial idea like maybe in the beginning stages, but then now you're like 7 or 8 months in, or maybe a year in, and you're like, I want to see if that old idea could work. I feel like the crypto space, you don't have to throw away things; you just have to repurpose them, recontextualize them in a different way most of the time, and you'll get a result that's interesting. Um, so yeah, I think my thoughts on like the tokenization, governance, and things of that nature, it changes often. Like even figuring out what to vote on chain versus what to vote off chain, is very important. Like sometimes it's much simpler to deploy a poll with like emoji signifiers within chat and pin it to a Discord channel, and tag everyone and get people to engage in that. I've gotten much faster responses than pushing people to try to use a snapshot. And this is not just even in Blackhand. This is just like in any sort of like governance model I've used so far. It's like we want to record things on chain, and I think for really big ticket items, especially when it comes to like treasury and things of that nature, like putting things on chain is super important. But then for some of the other like decisions that could be more spontaneous, it's harder to put a snapshot, but you can deploy a poll, and that is still useful. So yeah, it changes a lot, man. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think in my experience, like with forefronts and across the board with DAOs, that my answer would definitely be the same. There's no correct answer to the questions of like governance and tokenomics and all of these things that we're grappling with on a daily basis. And you kind of just have to like figure things out and chug along as you go, and you're making constant edits, and that's part of the process, right?
Absolutely.
I want to double down on one thing you mentioned, around education and sort of like recording your own thoughts and your own learnings throughout the process of building Blackhand. I feel like this has been like a mission for you across a lot of the projects that you're working on. And I'm curious to see how you think about like education specifically for like the process of building Blackhand, but like more broadly throughout the crypto space as well.
Yeah, education is real. We need it constantly. Uh, every conversation I usually have on Twitter with a couple of folks, they're always like, "How do we make spaces more inclusive? How do we make spaces more approachable and accessible?" Or they'll start with, and this is how I started. Even like tweeting, like saying, like, shit is very, very hard, and this, I don't like how the space doesn't have X, Y, and Z things. And what I came to realize is two big insights for me. The first is there's still shit that we're building actively right now that we don't even know what we're about to make until it happens. And it takes people to look at that work being done to find some type of words around it or words to describe the phenomena to then now categorize it as a thing for us to like pay attention to and to invite other people to offer their thoughts on it. And the big problem is that we haven't really facilitated enough of these sort of open conversations where we're inviting all different types of people with different viewpoints to discuss openly a lot of the things that are happening in the space, from a point of saying, okay, well, here's what we perceive to be new, or how might we look at this thing, and then having people actively record and kind of blast that out. And then you also, on the other end, like needing folks who are doing things, but then to be better at documenting what they are doing so that some people can disseminate that info and then teach it to other folks. And so there's a education gap for sure, and that's, I think, with any type of emerging technologies, that you're gonna have folks that are in it that are just doing it, bulldozing. You're gonna have people who are in it but may not be able to build, but have a very interesting, keen mind to partner with folks to then push folks to get things done in a completely different way. And then you have folks that are learning about it, but feel overwhelmed by all the different resources, but there's no kind of like, or there's little canon involved, insofar as like what definitive guides are. And it's kind of hard, right? Like, you can't really write a definitive guide on NFTs when NFTs, at least in this version of its iteration, has been wildly like growing each and every single day, right? Like, same with DAOs. Like, DAOs were not a fucking thing really, like, back then, even though they were out. It's not like they don't exist. And I think the thing about crypto too is many people are putting out first, but it's like, many things have existed probably between like 2017, 18, but just died because of the crash, or just lack of support, or just didn't know how to like build community. But many of the first that people say are New Nation first. But in any case, I think you can't build a definitive guide on many of these things yet, but we can at least attempt to start documenting all of these different events as they're happening and putting it in a space in which people can work with it or learn from it. But even with educational guides too, there's also a striation of audience to consider that most people don't consider. When folks are documenting things regularly, if you're in the space, you're going to document it from a perspective of someone who's in the space. You're going to document it from a perspective of people who know or are in tune with your job. You may have some certain things that like you may pare down a little bit, but you're not necessarily really always thinking about the brand new person that's into this. Because in certain people, when you're in it, you feel like when you got to explain something to somebody, you're like, well, damn, this would take way too long to explain it to you. Maybe I'll just show it. Maybe I'll show it to you. Maybe I'll do it for you. I don't know. But, there's like that whole dynamic too. And so there has to be scribes or people that we work with, or we have to practice this ourselves, to find the time and the grace and the patience to pare down what we're doing and find easier and simpler and more succinct ways. And I think being succinct is much more important. Being punctual is much more important necessarily than trying to find simple. But if we're very succinct in how we disseminate the things around us, and to describe the things that we're doing, it provides a much easier way for folks to digest that information and to take their time with it as well. And so it's very interesting about education, because that's something I challenge myself with often. Is like how quick or how succinct can I be when talking about the space if I'm describing it to someone for the very first time. What does that look like? What would be the steps for me if I wanted to learn how to go from 0 to 100? What does that look like? And could I build writing and journal entries and things about what I'm doing in a way to help people catch up to where I'm at, and then follow along with what I'm doing. And if I'm able to kind of build something like that through journaling or video or something to that effect, then I think that would be a very compelling thing for folks to want to get their hands on. Yeah, because I think if we have more of us in the space, then the more really cool ideas exist. I would not have been able to be super inspired by the space had I not built Midfilm with Carlos. For instance, like being able to see the diversity in opinion and creativity, especially like seeing the folks from Brazil doing amazing things, or folks from Hong Kong, or folks from Indonesia or Argentina. Because I'm not in those spaces on a day-to-day basis. I barely interface with those spaces, but being able to facilitate those artists, it opened my eyes to like the more cool ways crypto could be utilized. And like that really was a catalyst of saying, damn, like this is all about community. It's all about like building a diverse pool of people that can offer so many new perspectives to you that you didn't even know existed. And then if you know how to channel it, then you only are facilitating the most awesome fucking space of all time. And I think DAOs allow us to do that in a very big way. So education is super important because it leads to access. And when you have better access, you have a greater means of financializing that community so that they can benefit off of it, and so that you can benefit off of it in a very significant way. So I'm realizing I'm insanely long-winded today. I don't really know what it is, but yeah, I'll leave it.
You're totally good. Please, I mean, answers are very high quality, so you can be as long-winded as you like. But I want to build off that a bit. First of all, I want to say, if the audience has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, drop a question in the voice text. I know y'all have questions, so please do not be shy. But I'll get to your questions after this like final one that I have as well. On this topic of education, I think, and this is going to be somewhat vague, so bear with me here, but I think what's interesting about projects like Blackhand is that you're playing a game in like a traditionally like Web 2 centralized worlds, but with like a completely new infrastructure. And like in playing that game, the people that you're playing, like, and I mean game like literally here, the people that you're playing alongside or against might not have any idea what Blackhand looks like as an organization on the back end. But from your perspective, you are running a fundamentally different organization than virtually everybody else that you're playing against, right? So in building off of that, my question becomes like, in what ways can an organization like Blackhand gain competitive advantage in the games that they're playing as a result of the decentralization, but then also B, serve as like an educational tool to like the broader esports community, simply by like exposing them to these ideas as an opponent that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to?
That's a very great question, because I think the power of decentralization for us is that we have a larger hive mind to attack issues and to solve problems. When you have and to be fair, it's not unlike you having a really dope group of really high value contributor friends, like friends who are like really good in a particular space. Like if you are fortunate, for instance, to find really good bonds of people who are also folks within your industry or industry adjacent, for instance. It's kind of like having a group like that. But because this is much larger and can scale to be a vastly infinite gaming community, what we're able to sort of build off of each other is kind of like this expert knowledge in any particular game and looking at the game from any particular angle. No longer are we now having to just only look at, for instance, like just kind of like the core essential pros that have the spotlight. Let's say like, and I'm going to break it down a couple different ways. Let's just do like competition, like esports itself. If you're a player and you're learning how to play, or you're learning how to refine your gameplay mechanic, there's a couple of different ways you can sort of do this. And we'll just do like, let's say, battle royale shooters, for instance, because that's just kind of like it's one of the hottest things out. So like Apex Legends, for instance, right? You have to understand the game itself, the mechanics of the game. So how does movement work? How do all the weapons work? How do you win the game? What does the objectives look like? The map layout. How do you understand the layout of the map, and how it'll allow you to move around more efficiently. And then you start to build strategy around those sort of core components. And you sort of build it up like Lego blocks. The interesting thing though is that in the difference usually between a casual, a amateur, and a pro player is really a difference on how they approach their gameplay, how they approach their mechanics. If you're a casual person, you want something that you can pick up, you can play, you can enjoy, you get some gratification. You are not necessarily interested in wanting to really compete with other people. Even though you may have somewhat of a competitive spirit, you don't want to really tap into that because that's not fun for you. And that looks like a whole gamut of things. You may have been a really good player at one point, but then if you're playing casual, it's like you're relaxing. You're not thinking about all those other different things. But if you're pure casual, meaning you've never really done anything like competitive, it's all about the ease of onboarding into a game that makes the difference between whether or not you're going to play it versus someone else who has to like sort of earn more. They earn more by spending more time into it from a learning curve perspective. And amateur is kind of like in the middle between like I like to compete to a certain degree, and I like to relax, but I don't really want I want something that gives me some bit of a challenge. Their approach in gameplay is going to be a little bit differently. They may take a look into kind of like how to improve some core mechanics, or maybe they might be looking up which for example, like League of Legends, which legend has like some of like is in the best tier insofar as like what allows them to sort of like bulldoze or completely take over a game with, and I won't necessarily say little because I think it's taking it lightly, but with a decreased amount of effort when playing against casual players. And then pros are literally, and I think this is something that most people don't really understand, is that when you are a pro esports player, you are an athlete. And most people don't really assume or say the word athlete when it comes to an esports player, but that's what you are, mainly because you are so focused and dedicated on fundamentals. You're focused and dedicated on advanced tooling. You're focused and dedicated on map strategy. You are focused and dedicated on team communication, especially if it's a team game. You practice all of these things incessantly so that you can get better. Any incremental difference in your ability can make all the difference between you and someone else playing that game. Now, with the preamble kind of put aside, what makes decentralization kind of like an interesting challenge, and because I don't know if this is going to be better or not, is that now you can kind of pull a much wider net, cast a much wider net on all three tiers of people. You can now find and create much more accessible pathways for all three of these different groups to knowledge share. Because interestingly enough, you can be a casual player, do something that is considered off meta, and for those who don't know what meta and off meta is in like a gaming sense, Meta means kind of like the way in which most players generally are tending to play, like a general, more like a common play style about how folks usually win, or there's like a path to achievement that the game developers too also kind of like worked to sort of engineer in a sense. But you also kind of allow the players to kind of pick and choose, like, and figure out which champions, legends, whatever the people are, make the most sense in a game. And then off meta are picks of characters that may be a little bit more challenging, or their kit, meaning like their abilities or things that you can do with the character may not necessarily make the most sense at first, but you have to be a lot more creative in how you use them. And so sometimes what's really cool is that when you have a mixture of casual, amateur, and pro players all in the same sort of environment, when they all observe each other, everyone can learn from everyone. If you're only in a pro community, you're defaulted by what those pros do. If you're in an amateur community and you don't have access to the other two, you're kind of like stuck within that mind frame. And if you're casual, you don't really get to see kind of like the full gamut of everything else. But when you're all together, a casual player could use a particular character in a very unique way, and a pro and the casual person may say, "Oh my god, I got so lucky with this," or "I don't know what I just did," and a pro player might be looking at it and saying, "Damn, I did not really consider using that in that situation. I wonder if that could work in a real environment, in a real setting, and I'm going to try it out now." And I think being able to create like a larger access to interesting ideas, I think is what's going to really set us apart. And because we're all in this to win, and we're sort of incentivized by our players of all different types to build really cool content, to compete, and to win. I think our community, in a way, is also going to be able to see certain patterns and see certain things happen in the space faster than others. And by building this sort of like decentralized network, we may actually be springing into action a whole lot more, to take advantage of certain things, at a different and at a better rate than other esports teams. Our staffing can be much more unique and diverse too, when it comes to coaches, and when it comes to player coaches and assistants, and when it comes to folks that are doing mental training. We can, of course, engineer and stand up new pathways for folks to get access into the esports industry as a result of being a more decentralized framework. And I think the other cool thing too is that as we're standing up our own environments, we now have a chance to build, our own leagues and our own paths, so that we're inviting everyone else to now play in our playground. And I think that's a really neat and cool thing to consider. I hope I answered your question. I feel like I might have in some respect, but I think there's other exterior sources that I think give us a competitive edge, more so than something like real pointed, that I can provide right at this moment.
No. That definitely answered the question. Like, obviously, that the answer to that question is obviously like TBD, right? Like, there's going to be some emergent advantages and disadvantages that pop up as this experiment evolves. But no, I appreciate you taking the time to sort of break that down. That was super interesting. I want to open things up again. If the audience has any questions, I'm on my end, like, questioned out. I might have one or two more in the queue if we have time. But if anybody else wants to raise their hand, come to stage, get a question in these last few minutes, or even drop a question in the voice text, please do so. I want to make sure we get everybody's voices heard. In the meantime, Cersei, do you have anything that you sort of want to share with the audience, with the community, about the Black Hand and what y'all are working on, like, in the coming weeks?
Yeah, so in the coming weeks, literally actually in the next 2 days, we're pushing out our open call and combine for players and for coaching staff. So I'm going to put that out on not Medium, Mirror, in the next couple of days. Within that, we have some really cool announcements that we're going to make. We have one of the founders of the Goalie Guild, Goldie, from TGG, being one of our core staff members in player recruitment and in coaching. We're going to be building out our combine, which is sort of like a selection and series of mock games, with sort of the 5 games that we're announcing, or 4 plus 1 more. These games that we're competing in specifically for next season, i.e. next year, is going to be Apex Legends, Halo Infinite, as far as our non-crypto native games. And then on the crypto native side, we're going to be heads first in Axie Infinity and in Parallel TCG. And then our last game is community choice. So if you're a part of our community or want to join our community, you can vote on, or we'll have an open call for suggestions for the game for all of our community members to compete in, and for our team, for us to build a team around. And we'll be doing sort of like each year. We'll be doing at least 2 or 3 community choices. So each season, we'll add a game to our roster of community choice games, and then see kind of like how the community identifying games for us to play and building a team around, how good that is versus kind of like some of the games we already wanted to play when we first started our org. So I'm very curious to kind of see how that conversation and how that plays out over time. So that's our big first announcement. Our second is that we're going to be unveiling more details about how our seasons work insofar as a battle pass. If you are a hand holder or not a hand holder, there's really cool abilities that you can, or value that you can glean or that you can earn throughout our 4-month seasons by participating in community-based events, doing different challenges and or bounties, and other cool things. If you're a person that wants to be a member but does not want to fork over the amount within Uniswap to purchase R100 tokens, then going through the Battle Pass is a way for you to potentially earn a full membership just by doing some really cool creative work for our community and having fun in the process. And then for those who are already members, especially those who have purchased some of our crowdfund NFTs and some other NFTs that we're going to issue called the Hand of Access, there are ways for you to earn even more premium and cooler rewards as a result of that. We wanted to figure out a way to create community engagement that made sense to sort of like what gaming culture already is used to, and battle passes have been a super pervasive method of engagement for any type of game. So we wanted to really kind of like experiment with that format and see how we can make this work. So we're gonna have more details on that in the next week as well. Coming weeks after that, after the combine and after we've recruited some of our other pro players, we're gonna do team announcements. We're gonna refactor our entire website so that we can facilitate kind of like the announcement of all those players. Most of them are already streamers in their own right. We're going to be pushing out some tests on a platform called Glass that's much more crypto native. So be aware that we'll be streaming on Twitch and on Glass, but if you are using Glass, you'll find some really cool means of experimenting with like NFTs and other cool crypto native abilities within that ecosystem. And then lastly, we'll be doing some more comprehensive reports on our treasury, a little bit more asset acquisition in certain games that we find may have promise, and of course some collaborations with some really cool guilds coming up very, 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 very soon. So those are sort of like the sort of initial things that we have in the coming weeks. In October, we have our first tournament that we're hosting, our first community tournament called the Monster Mash Invitational. It is Halloween themed. This is probably, I don't celebrate Halloween, so this is like the first time I'm actually doing anything Halloween related, but I think it just makes sense. We're going to have 8 games that we're hosting in competition to earn really cool rewards from the Black Hand team and other sponsors. And of course, we also have Halloween themed competitions as well. So you could be a gamer and not want to compete in a game, but there's another tournament or other tournaments that you can be a part of, i.e., the most menacing and coolest costume, or some other stuff related to that. So want to find ways to make this fun. It's going to be a online only type of event, but we will find ways to facilitate really cool things like costumes and whatnot. We'll be live streaming. So those are some of the things you can expect from the Black Hand crew between now and sort of like towards the end of the year.
Sick. Well, super excited for all of that. Best of luck to you and the team on all of that, and hopefully Forefront and the squad over here can continue to collab with y'all in making that stuff happen. Looks like we are out of time, so appreciate everybody in the audience for coming through. If you guys have any questions, feel free to just like tag me or Sursu in the voice text. And we will be back next week with another Hangout. But yeah, really, really appreciate you hopping on today, Sursu. And yeah, take care.